Starving children, dangerously malnourished. Amputations performed without anaesthetic. Entire families killed. Israel's war in Gaza has been filled with horrors that are hard to fathom. Israel accused of deliberately blocking aid, even as a humanitarian crisis deepens. Today, it led to arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as former Defense Minister GALLANT, being issued by the International Criminal Court for their alleged role in the suffering. Judges ruled there are reasonable grounds to believe they are responsible for the war crime of starvation, as well as the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution and other inhumane acts, and of intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population. The court also issued a warrant for Hamas's military commander, Mohammed Deif, though he's believed to be dead, accusing him of crimes against humanity as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population of Israel on October the 7th. It's the arrest warrants for Israeli politicians that are unprecedented. Netanyahu becoming the first leader of a Western-style democracy to be accused by the court. Here he was in Washington just a few months ago, given a rapturous welcome by Congress.
America and Israel must stand together.
Today, he dismissed the charges as absurd, biased and anti-Semitic. But public statements made by the men themselves form part of the evidence against them. At the start of the war, GALLANT said food, water and fuel would all be blocked from entering Gaza. In the face of international pressure, aid has been allowed in, but nowhere near enough. Today in Gaza, displaced Palestinians welcomed the charges, though many fear they'll have little impact.
We hope that the decision issued today will serve the Palestinians and serve us here in particular in Gaza, and that it will not be like other decisions that have passed unnoticed.
Will Netanyahu and GALLANT ever face the judges at the ICC? Everyone knows it's unlikely. The court has no police force to arrest anyone. But trips like this to London before the war will now be much more difficult. Many of Israel's allies are members of the ICC and are now obliged to detain the men if they enter the country, though America is not and has rejected the warrants. In Israel, where focus remains on the hostages still held captive by Hamas, even staunch critics of Netanyahu spoke out in his defense.
It means that we as Jews and the state of Israel has no right to defend themselves against all these attacks and evil things that are being done against us, and they are defending us against that.
Even if support around Netanyahu is rallying now, some say the arrest warrant will damage him politically.
I think there will be a shift from defending what they say the Prime Minister, what he represents as the most powerful position in Israel politics, into a little bit of soul-searching about how Israel got to this point.
Israel's assault on Gaza is continuing. In the north, tens of thousands of Palestinians have been forced to flee amidst fears they'll never be allowed to return. Overnight, dozens were killed in strikes across Gaza. Here, the funerals of 3 children in the southern city of Khan Yunis. What impact, if any, will today's arrest warrants have on international efforts to finally reach a ceasefire?
Well, earlier I spoke to Jeffrey Robertson, Casey, a leading human rights lawyer who has been a UN war crimes judge. I began by asking how historic these arrest warrants are.
Well, we've had Kenyan leaders issued with warrants. They turned up, they were given bail. and they fought the case through lawyers. It never got to trial. But so there are precedents, but never perhaps a leader that is so blindly backed by America, which is not a member of the court, but will bring pressure upon it. And we just hope that the judges are independent enough, and they've shown independence by issuing this arrest warrant today.
What the Israelis will say, I'm sure, and they have to answer for themselves, obviously, is that the civilians who died in the Gaza Strip, and they would obviously dispute the numbers of civilians that have been killed, died either because they were used as human shields by Hamas or because they were, they got in the way. It was an unfortunate so-called collateral damage of the conflict, that dreadful term. But that they did not go out of their way to target these individuals.
Well, the prosecutor will say damage is not collateral if it's directly aimed. And so that's the answer to that.
What's the procedure now for the ICC?
The procedure is that the case goes to the next stage, and Mr. Khan, or whoever it is, will seek an indictment. Mr. Netanyahu can, I think he'd be allowed to send lawyers to the court to oppose that, although it's not necessary. The important thing to remember is that the ICC does not have the power to try him in absentia, no matter how strong the evidence.
So you need to actually arrest him in order to put him on trial, put him in the dock.
They need to put him in the dock.
Now, is that going to be likely?
First of all, Netanyahu himself may stay away. The downside for that is there are 124 countries signed up to the ICC, so he won't be able to travel very far.
But enforcement is voluntary, isn't it? So a country could choose not to arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu without warrant.
They'd have to leave the ICC. South Africa tried this with the head of Sudan, who was indicted, and the court ruled that it couldn't. So this is one of its obligations.
So what's the sanction? The sanction is to expel that country from the ICC?
Yes, which most countries don't want to be expelled. They will do what was done with Putin in that other conference last year. They simply warned him, it was in South Africa. South Africa warned him not to come, and he didn't. And Netanyahu would be given the same warning.
So his world has shrunk considerably.
It has, and he would be seen as an international fugitive.
Finally, and very briefly, Jeffrey Robertson, how likely from your experience, and given who else has turned up in the dock when people said it was impossible, how likely do you think it is that he and the other people who've been issued with this warrant will end up on trial?
Well, everyone said Milosevic, indict him. He'll never turn up. And yet his people handed him over. I think it is not impossible if he fell from power.
So the most likely people to hand him over would be the Israelis themselves, rather than him getting arrested on the streets of London or Paris.
It would be an easy way of disposing of him, were he to fail at the next elections, sent off to defend himself. But that's not likely. The likelihood is there'll be enormous American pressure to protect him, and we'll just have to wait and hope to see this court showing its independence. It's not anti-Semitic. That's an outrageous lie by Israel. There's nothing anti-Semitic about it. We can see on our television the war crimes every night as residential areas are bombed and children dug out of the rubble.
Jeffrey Robertson, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me now is the Israeli diplomat and journalist Alan Pinkas. He's also served as an advisor to two former prime ministers, Ehud Barak and Shimon Peres. Alan Pinkas, good to speak to you again. What do you make of this arrest warrant then against Mr. Netanyahu and the former defense minister, Yoav Gallant?
Well, good to be with you, Matt. It was predictable. It was anticipated. It was expected. The chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, requested the warrants from the court in May. So that's 6 months ago. And it took time, but here we are. So on the one hand, it did not come as a surprise. On the other hand, you see by Israel's vociferous reaction that this hit a quite an exposed nerve. You know, you put into this blender of Israeli responses anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and an international conspiracy and a cabal and terrorism and Iran, and you blend and everyone drinks out of the same concoction, and everyone comes out with basically the same righteous indignation. On the other hand, I just listened very carefully to the very interesting interview you conducted with Jeffrey Robertson. He makes very, very important points. You know, Mr. Netanyahu cannot be tried in absentia. He knows that. Yeah. He will not test this. But then again, he A, is a fugitive. B, as you said correctly, Matt, his world shrunk considerably.
Right. I mean, does Israel itself, and I know that Netanyahu has been incredibly unpopular, you know, with lots of people for lots of other reasons, but the war itself has, as far as I can understand, been supported by the Israeli public. Does Israel itself now feel as a pariah because its democratically elected leader has been issued with this arrest warrant?
Well, that's a complex question. Let me explain why. What's complex about it? On the one hand, people disapprove of Netanyahu. They see him as responsible and believe he should be held accountable for the calamity of October 7th. Yes, they were pro the war. No, they do not truly realize and understand what Israel did in Gaza. Some do and don't care. Some choose not to know, and some just don't know.
Right.
Now, you know, you have to understand the Israeli mindset, because there's a symbolic dimension to this and a practical dimension. The practical, I think, was covered way better than I can possibly do by Jeffrey Roberts in terms of the legality or the legal issues. But there's a symbolism here. Here's an Israel that believes it's on the moral high ground, that believes it has the most moral military in the world, that believes it is defending itself.
Right.
That you have to understand, the military, the Israeli military, is not some professional army. It's everyone. It's a people's.
But do you?
So people feel bad.
Right. But do you personally agree with the government in Tel Aviv that has said this is an anti-Semitic act? This arrest warrant is anti-Semitic.
No, I do not.
I mean, that is clearly what they're trying to do here.
Well, they're doing two things, Matt. First of all, Mr. Netanyahu, who suffers from a long time Louis XIV syndrome, identifying the state with himself and himself with the state, turns this into everyone's problem. We are being attacked by anti-Semites. We are the victims of a global conspiracy centered in The Hague, blah blah, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
The second thing is that look, the prime minister of my country is accused of war crimes. There's no question in my mind that he will not stand up trial.
But just briefly, sorry to interrupt you because we've slightly run out of time, Alan. Just one final one, briefly.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible, as Jeffrey Robertson has suggested, that actually maybe the Israelis themselves might arrest him and hand him over to the ICC?
No,
or is that never going to happen?
No, no, for a very practical reason. If the prime minister of your country is accused of war crimes, crimes against humanity, as is the defense minister, it inevitably entails that about 200 other brigadier generals, major generals, lieutenant generals, and even colonels will be accused of similar crimes.
Right.
No, I don't think that will happen.
Alan, we've run out of time. Alan Pincus, thank you very much indeed for joining us on such a complex issue.
Matt.
Thank you.